Good evening. My name is Jim Kello. Welcome to NixTrainz. This is where modelers or mentors can help modelers build better. Thanks for coming. We really do appreciate you. Hope you'll tell your friends about us so that they can join the show too. If you're new to the show, I hope you'll go to our website, newtraxmodeling.com, and subscribe. You'll receive an email from the website. You'll confirm that. Then you're officially a subscribed member, and you'll get all of the latest information about the login links and what's on the shows and so forth. You'll also be eligible for any door prizes. We need a lot of help to produce our shows. And one kind of help in particularly we need is somebody who is familiar with the YouTube operation, who can help us monitor the YouTube and keep track of who is on the chat in YouTube and make sure that their chat question gets answered, the same as any question gets answered from the Zoom. So if you have that capability, we'd like to hear from you because we need to be able to keep track of the YouTube chat function. And for that, we need a person who knows how to do that on YouTube and can help us in that regard. There's a plaque on the screen right now with that kind of information on it and who to contact and so forth, and look forward to hearing from you. If you have any other talents that you think may be needed, and I guarantee you they are, because we need all the help we can get producing these shows, please let us know. It's not just that we need this YouTube moderation. We need a lot of different people doing a lot of different jobs. And we sure could appreciate your help. If you'd like to be a presenter on the show, that's as much an important part of the show as helping us produce it. So we'd appreciate it if you'd let us know about that. I'd like to talk about the build-alongs now. Rick and Marie Hunter are on tonight with their build-along of one of their Hunter Line 81-foot trestles. This is the second time for Rick and Marie, and we really do appreciate their participation and support of the show. They've really been fantastic, and I think that you're really enjoying what they're doing and how they are presenting their models on the build-alongs. At least that's the emails that I'm getting. So starting September the 22nd, Martin Breckbilt, MMR, is going to be building a Leadville Designs maintenance of way car kit. If you're not familiar with this company, I encourage you to go on our website and find out about them, and then go to their website and get more information. All of these companies are listed on our website with a great deal more information than I'm giving right now. I just don't have time during the show to give all of the information about each company, the kind of discounts they're offering, and when and where they're going to be presenting. October the 13th, Jim Murphy is going to be building a LaBelle Woodworking business card kit in HO. October the 16th, Bill Davis is going to be building a rail scale models tobacco barn in O scale. November the 6th, David Schultz is going to be building an All Nations new waffle boxcar kit in O scale. By the way, All Nations is coming back into the market after being gone for a long time because of the death of the person that originally started All Nations. So we really welcome them back and hope that you'll pay attention to the models that they are now bringing into the market. If you've got a modeling question, then we have a form on our website. All you have to do is fill it out, and we'll try to get you an answer as soon as we can. We'll either get somebody on the show to answer your question, or somebody from the show can do a special segment on your situation and address the specific question that you have. We've done several of those so far. James Schultz is a modeler who did one recently on how to take a very inexpensive car and turn it into something that you really be proud of and want everybody to see it. We've also got the next My Bill coming up moderated by Chris Course, on September the 22nd. It's open to everybody. If you'd like us to see one of your models, and we hope you do, because that's just as important part of mentoring as anything else that you can possibly do for a modeler. The modelers need to see what's available, what you have done, how you have solved problems, the models that you have built, and that's what the My Build is all about. So we hope that you'll participate in it, and just let Chris know that you want to be on the show that night, and he'll make arrangements. We have a door prize tonight, and it is a very special door prize. It's being donated by an HO scale modeler, David Ray, who built a Paul Egret designed engine house on the show over about a month and a half in small segments. And Dave built this in HO scale. Dave is an N-scale modeler normally, but he did this because he could do it a little bit differently. And he thought that doing it in a larger scale might appeal to more modelers. So he chose HO to build this model. He's donating it free of charge. He'll ship it to you. This contest, or this drawing, is only really open to HO scale modelers, because what Dave wants is for somebody to really enjoy what he did with this kit. He did a beautiful job building it. It's a card model. It's not a wooden model. And I think once you see it in person, you're going to be absolutely amazed at the quality of the kit and of the quality of the modeling that David put into it. So if you are an HO scale modeler, this is going to be awarded only to people on the show tonight, either on Zoom or YouTube. All you have to do is put in the chat function now, between now and maybe 30 minutes from now or so. Ken, you can correct me if I'm wrong about that. All you have to do is put the word enter in the chat function, and your name will automatically be included in the group that's going to be, the winner is going to be selected from.
Actually, I changed it to the word win.
Okay. So don't
if
enter.
You'd rather do enter, that's fine too. Win or enter, fine.
So what we want you to do is go to chat and tell us that you want to be a part of participating in trying to win David's kit. So you can enter, you can type in enter in the chat or type in win in the chat. I don't really care. It's just, we're trying to limit this only to people who are HO scale modelers, because David is donating this kit that he's built, but he'd like for somebody to really enjoy it on their layout and not just have somebody win it and put it up for sale on eBay or something. I think this is so generous of him, and it's really something. I really appreciate his participation in the program, not just building the kit, but then turning around and donating it. We'll announce the winner before the show is over. And I really do appreciate, again, your participation, and look forward to announcing the winner. Now I'd like to go to Paul Thomson for our quick tip of the evening. Paul, welcome.
Thanks, Jim. And let me just see if I can share my screen here. I've got a quick tip today that I'm hoping will be quick. There we go. Okay, what you see here is a couple of plastic cups, and where these things come from is basically when the wife gets a little antsy and wants you to order in dinner, and sometimes the sauce will come in these things, and they're nifty little cups. But the real tip tonight is how you can use some of these things at times. And we'll go to this one first, because if someone comes to the door, or if the wife calls for dinner and you're in the middle of something and you've got paint open or another substance that needs to be dried out, a little bit of cling wrap put over the bowl and then snapped on the lid should keep this for a temporary storage. And I repeat, temporary storage. This is not going to last days, but this will get you by for a few hours until you can get back to something during an interruption. And with that in mind, the same thing works for a brush that you don't need to clean right away and you want to get back to it within a few hours. And cling wrap will keep things nicely ready for you to go. Again, I would say this is not a long-term solution. This is short-term for those interruptions where you need to get back to something, but you're going to have a bit of time. And that, guys, is my quick tip for the night. And I appreciate those that have come forward with some quick tips, and we'll schedule you in. Thank you very much.
And to follow up what Paul is saying, if you'll let Paul or Ted Becker know that you have a quick tip that you'd like to present on the program, just let send one of them an email and tell them that you have the quick tip, what it is, and then they'll schedule you on the program. That way, they don't have to come up with all of these great ideas all by themselves. They can share the wealth with other modelers and have your quick tips be on the program. So just let Paul or Ted know and take it from there. Thanks again, Paul. I really appreciate it.
Thanks, Jim.
Now I'd like to go to our special segments for the evening. The first one is Rick and Marie Hunter and their build along of their 81-foot trestle. Rick, Marie, thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for doing this.
Thanks for having us.
Hi, Jim. How are you?
I'm doing well.
It seems like some of these Canadian guys are getting a storm right now, so they might disappear. But we are not, for a change, so we're good. I am Rick Hunter, and this is my wife, Maureen, and we own Hunter Line in Cambridge, Ontario. So what we're doing is we are building our 81-foot trestle. Let's see, where are we? There we are. And we have two different versions of it. We have the frame and a pile. And for those that are building it, you know which one you're doing. So tonight, what we want to do is, after you've done your homework for last week, we want to do the tie stringer assembly, which is putting the ties on the stringers themselves. So Maureen is going to show you just exactly what we mean by that. If you were involved in the king post, you already know, but you got to remember this is 3 times longer.
You have to share the screen.
Oh yeah, I got to share the screen, right. Okay. There we go.
Okay, so I'm gonna move this a little bit. Yeah, we got that in a good spot.
Do a twist.
There
There we go. We're good.
Okay, so tonight we're gonna do the tie stringer assembly, like Rick said. You need to make sure that you've got a nice flat board as a working surface. You don't want to have any warps in your bridge, so make sure it's really flat. And then what you want to do is take your drawing and
By the way, we're doing the S scale version so that you can see what we're doing.
yeah. And what I've done is I've taken a top view of that drawing because it just shows the tie stringer assembly. Okay, so that's the top view. All right, so what you want to do is just tape that down on your board with some masking tape, and then take a piece of wax paper and put it over top of that drawing and tape it down as well, because that'll protect your drawing. You can do all your cutting on the drawing, and you can also use your glue on the drawing, and it won't damage that drawing because you can use that drawing again if you want to make another bridge. So the first thing we're going to do is cut those stringers to length. Okay, and they're the 12 by 18s. So you need to find your 12 by 18s and lay them on your drawing. You can use this view, the top view, or you could also lay it on the side view of your drawing if you chose to, and lay it right along the stringer there as your guide. But I have already taped down the top view. Okay, so just line up your stringer on the drawing carefully and take your razor saw and just cut it to the length. It's about there. I usually start it on the drawing and then I switch it to my cutting board. Okay, So you're gonna have a lot of excess lumber. You can keep that for something else. I take a little file and just file the end of that stringer where I cut it. Okay, then you can use that stringer to cut the next one. But make sure that you always use that first stringer as your guide.
If you don't use the original one that you measured, you have the tendency to either make them all a little smaller as you cut or a little bigger as you cut. So if you always go back to the first one you cut, they should be pretty accurate.
Okay, so that's how I cut those stringers. Just file them a little bit. Okay, and I've already cut all 6 of my stringers, so they're all the same length. Okay. All right, so the next step.
You can see on the drawing that the stringers are underneath the tie. So this is a stringer, this is a stringer, and this is a stringer. Now the stringers should have just a tiny little space in between each one, because it needs that little space for drainage. Because if you put them tight together, they're going to pool and eventually rot out. So what we want to do, just like our king post one, we want to get a rigid assembly as quick as we can, so that we can just continue on without worrying about flopping here and there.
The next thing I would suggest is to cut your tie guard. Right?
Tie guard, yeah.
They're the 6x6s. So again, you would just lay that. You can see. Do we have it named on this one? I think it's on the side view drawing, but it's where you see the little NBWs. That's the tie guard. Okay, that one right there. So lay your 6x6 on there. I've already cut mine, but you would just cut it to the length down here. Okay, and then just give it a little file. So you've got 2 tie guards and they're cut. And the next step is to put either a 2-sided sticky tape, or I usually just take masking tape, and I want to put the sticky side up. I make one the length of that stringer assembly, and I take 2 little pieces of tape to hold it down on each end. So put the sticky side up, right down the middle, like that, and stick that down. I know I'm off screen here, but
as tight as possible.
yeah, as tight as you can get it. Okay, and then you've already done all the coloring of your ties, and maybe you've done them in different colors. So in this this step, just put them down haphazardly. I'm going to put every 4th tie on this sticky tape. So I'm going to start where you see here on the tie guard, you've got an MBW. That little black dot is right on the very first tie. So I'm going to put this one here. All right. And then every 4th one. And we've got them marked there for you. Now you just kind of, you're just doing this by eye. And if one's a little off, it really doesn't matter. I think if you go and walk the line, sometimes you'll see that they're not perfect. So you just go along and put them all on. Doesn't matter what color, just mix them up.
And then as we get to the center, there's what's called the refuge platform. So the ties that are underneath the refuge platform go from one side of the bridge to the other side of the platform. So you should find 3 longer ties.
Long ones, yeah. So that's those ones. I'm a little off, but I gotta change that one. There we go. And here's the other ones.
If you're not sure about this process, you can go back to our king posts YouTube and that'll be explained there too.
We're on page 9 of the instructions. Okay, that's where we're working from here. I know I'm going off screen, so I'm just going to quickly put the rest of these on so I can skip to the next step. Okay, I'm at the last one. And now what you want to do is at least start with the outside stringer.
Yeah,
okay?
now one of the things about the stringers, the difference between standard gauge and narrow gauge, there's little groupings of 3 stringers on each side of the bridge, okay? The general rule of thumb is the center of the 3 is directly under your rail. So if you were a narrow gauge, you would actually have these a little bit towards the center than what the drawing is.
Okay, so, and you can kind of see, if you push down your ties, you can see on masking tape where those stringers are supposed to be. Okay, so I use Tite Bond glue. I think this is Tite Bond 2 that I've got, and I've got this little applicator bottle that works great. I just put my Tite Bond in there. And in a second, I think my hole is plugged. Just a second. These are great little bottles, though. You can get them on Amazon. And you just kind of put a little bit. You don't need a lot of glue. Put it on every 4th tie. I'm going to go right down the line here. There we go. And then take your stringer, your 8 by 18, and you're going to put it vertical right along that the ties.
If it sticks out the end a little bit too far, don't worry about it because you can send that off later.
Yeah. And if you've got some excess glue, I usually just take a little tweezer and just scrape it away.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch right there.
Yeah, there's a whole bunch there. I just wipe it on my hand or wherever. Just check along, make sure you get it all off. Looks pretty good. Okay, so that looks pretty good. And I'm going to put the other outer on. A little dab. Works quite quickly with this little bottle.
It's a lot easier than using a toothpick.
Yeah, just have to dab it along. And take your other stringer. And the same, just line it up. I think we're good. Okay, and again, take your glue off, any excess. And here's where I probably would maybe let that set up a little bit. So get yourself some weights.
And bottles work great.
Fine weather, mix works great.
You got to remember each bottle is 8 ounces. So there goes 1.5 pounds on there right now.
Yeah. Yeah. So I would just let that set up a little bit. Okay. And then, maybe give it 5-10 minutes.
And through the magic of television, we have one done. No.
Then you would go along and do the same thing, dab the glue on. I can do a couple here. I'll stick the next one on.
So what we've got done now, if it dries, if you allow it to dry, then you have a rigid assembly. You can turn it over, you can do anything you want with it. It's easier to work with. So what we're going to do, it's 6 of one, 6 of the other if you do the ties first or the stringers first. So we're in the habit of doing all the stringers. So she's going to put the stringers on now. You can see there's a little gap in between there.
Just a little.
That's that drainage I was telling you about. So that middle one right there that she's putting on would be directly under the rail. It's funny how our drawings are made that way. So if you're in standard gauge, you don't have to worry about it.
Okay. And next. Okay. That one on, little space again, just ever so slight.
And again, like you can see that one sticking out a little bit at the end. That doesn't matter. You can take it off later by filing it off.
I'll try to even.
There. Okay.
Okay. And we got another 2 to go here. And I think I'm just gonna go right along and do the other side. Oop. Helps if I aim it in the right place. So get your third one on that side on there.
Security alarm alert. Stop. Stop. Good girl. Good girl. It's okay.
Okay, and I've got a little bit of glue down this end that you can't see, but I'm gonna scrape it off here.
If you hear some crying in the background, our granddaughter and our great-granddaughter are here from Victoria.
Congratulations.
Oh, thank you.
Okay, I think.
So it's not me crying, okay?
I think I've got it down here pretty good. And again, put your weights on. And let it set up.
Now, I know some of the fellas are maybe trying to attempt the curved trestle, which is a different feat than doing it this way. This is a lot easier. So what makes it on a curve? General rules of thumb, and every kit has got the curved instructions in it, okay? The general rule of thumb is the bent is perpendicular to the track. And the stringers that we just did actually form little tangents going around the circle. And that goes right above that joint between the little tangents, go right above the bent. In our instructions, it explains that, but that is how you make a curve. And then the ties do the curve on each tangent. So some of the ties are going to be a little farther over this way, and on the opposite side, they'll be a little farther over this way. It's a whole process by itself to make it into a curve.
Okay.
And if you are so inclined and you want to try it, go for it.
Just for the interest of time, I would let that set up a little bit longer for sure. But
Rick, what's the one thing you really have to be careful about if you're going to do this on a curve?
You got to remember that when you do the curve, you got to remember it's the inverse. Like when you turn it over, okay? We had the incident many years ago where we were doing a slow S trestle. Okay, and this was for one of the giveaway layouts at Springfield, Massachusetts. And so, okay, we're spread out on the table in the slow S, and that was really fine. And then we started putting vents on, and we're, you know what? This isn't right, because it's the inverse. And so the S was a great S, but it was the wrong curves. Anyways, what you learn, okay?
What you want to do when this is all set up and dry, I would strongly suggest you wait until it's dry, is just loosen your tape on both ends and flip the structure over, okay? And very carefully pick up that tape. Just kind of hang on to your ties. Mine aren't quite dry, but just remove the tape. There we go. And you can see there's some little spots here that have some glue, so just go along and scrape that glue off. Sometimes in between the ties, you get a little bit.
Geez, you can actually see the spaces between the stringers.
Yeah. Then now what you're going to do is start putting your ties on.
Now, this is the same process as we did on the king post. So if you're every fourth tie, then you put one in between, one in the middle of what you got there, and then one on the quarter mark and one on the 3/4 mark.
You can put it over top of your drawing, but you know, you really don't have to. You can just put a
This is better done by eyesight than
Yeah.
actually by trying to get to the drawing.
put a little strip down the middle, one beside it. And then stick your ties on. And again, just haphazardly with the color. Okay,
So when you get those three in the center, you can see if one's got a bigger space or a
yeah,
little smaller space or whatever. You can do the adjustment right here.
and just try to get them as close as possible.
And if one is a little bit longer than the other one, don't worry about it. That's prototypical.
Down the middle, on each side. And then your 3 ties.
And if you did your ties in different colors, like Maureen has 3 different colors here, whatever, you see, we're not lining them up by colors, we're just, whatever's there, you grab it and put it on.
Yeah. They don't have to be perfect, that's for sure.
This is one of the reasons we don't use CA glue, because you don't have enough time to adjust.
Okay, do this as the last one to show you. I think we're getting close to our time. Yeah, these ties look pretty good. They're I think I did dark brown,
Medium brown.
medium
and-
brown, and tie brown.
Yeah, I think so.
They're pretty good. Kind of crooked. So then you, of course, would let these set up. Whoop. I'm knocking them all over here. Okay. So just work your way down that assembly and stick all your ties in. And then let that set up. Put some weights on it. And then what you're going to do is take your tie guard, and you can see on your drawing that it goes right to the edge.
Just inside the
Yeah,
edge of the
just-
ties.
Just inside. So you would take your glue and just, you know, put a stripe all the way down the whole assembly. And put your tie guard on. And again, weight that. Okay. Do we have time, Rick, to show an MBW? Are we okay, Jim, to show the MBWs, or are we over?
We can do it next week.
Yeah, I think next week would be better.
Next week?
Okay.
Okay, all right.
So the
that's it.
homework is get all the stringers together like that and all the ties on there and the tie guards on there. Now, a big caution, you'll notice that the platform has got railings around it. Do not put the railings on at this point because you have to keep turning this whole assembly upside down. And if you have the railing on, you're not going to be able to turn it upside down. So don't do that. That's more of a warning for next week than this week, but I can't stress that more. So, okay, so do all the stringers and do all the ties. Don't forget the 3 bigger ties in the middle and do the tie guards on there. Anything else
Okay.
for tonight?
I think that's it. Anybody have any questions? Good. Okay. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Jim.
Have fun.
So much. I can't thank you both enough. You just do a beautiful job. Maureen, it's really looking good.
Well, you ought to see me try one of these. I have the glue stick to my fingers all the time, you know, like. Okay, good night, everybody. Sorry, we have company to go to, but we're done tonight, okay?
Yes, sir, I understand. If I had great-grandchildren and grandchildren, I'd be there too. Thanks again so much for both of you.
Okay, thanks, everyone. Have a good evening.
Bye-bye.
Well, next is Bob Farquhar. And Bob is going to do Basic Electronics 101 tonight. And Bob, I really do appreciate you wanting to do this. And thank you so much for offering. So I'll turn it over to you, sir.
Thank you, sir. And it's going to be basic electrics, not electronics, but a lot
Okay,
of people don't understand basic electrics. So I put this together just for the very, very basic. People that are experienced on this stuff would be bored, but anyway, just bear with me. For AC and DC, alternating current, normal household power, and direct current, for example, a car battery. And the voltage, for example, that's shown on AC is like 120 volts VAC, and DC is done at, like, for example, 12 volts DC.
No,
So basically it's the amount of water flowing in a river, and amperage is the strength of that water current or the ocean tide, and expressed in amps or milliamps. You'll see mostly milliamps for model training stuff. So amperage is what can kill you. You can have 10,000 volts, for example, in a static grass unit, but only has about 30 milliamps pushing it. So if you touch it, get a little jolt, well, that won't kill you. But you do 120 volt AC with 100 amp in there, you're pretty much kiss yourself goodbye. So these are the symbols. You see, these are the standard symbols like that's AC, DC. Now, sometimes you see DC with a line at the top and a dotted line in the bottom, and this ground, battery, fuse, resistor. Now, this is a potentiometer, and it's nicknamed a pot, and it's a variable resistor. So this line here can move back and forth for higher voltage or higher resistance or so on. Ohms, a transformer, diode. Now, a diode, the electricity goes from, for example, here from left to right, and tries to go from right to left. This line pretty much blocks it. So this for LED, light emitting diode. There's a diode with a light coming out of it. There's what the arrows are for. And the for motor and a capacitor. So these are the two sine waves, whatever, for the power. So AC, this one cycle here goes up and down to this point here. That's one cycle, and AC does it 60 times a second. So the DC, what they do is take that the negative part of the voltage here on from the AC and put it this way. So that gives you the DC voltages. So in this example for the LED, going for the powers up here through the diode and the light being diode and the light with light. And there's a positive there with the battery around the other way, and it will not light because of that. So this symbol for the diode, of course, has a line in there, and there it is on the, I'm trying to get rid of this, sorry, that, anyway, There's a black line on here on these diodes, and this is a common one. A 4001 is a common diode used in model train things. And for resistors, these are the bands. They're for example, this one is a red first band, second band, third band, and a fourth band here. So generally, the fourth band is for the tolerance of the number, and there's usually a gap in here between the last band, third band, and the here. So in this case, it's a red, green, black. So you do red is 2, green 5, and black is 1. So it's 25 ohms. That's it. If you had it, for example, red, green, red, then it'd be 2,500 ohms. And capacitors, if you ever use one of these, make sure you connect these ones properly. If you have them shorted or reversed, it will blow up. And so they're generally the negative side here on these type of either has a band on it or had an arrow on it. And this type here, this is the actual capacitor. It's the same as type of this one type of thing, but it's connected to each end. And the dimpled end is the positive side. Sorry, ceramic capacitors doesn't matter. These type don't matter which way you connect them. Wire gauges. So the more amperage you want to put into the wire, you have to have a thicker wire. And whatever reason, the larger the gauge number, the smaller the diameter of the wire. So, for example, there's 12 gauge. Example, there's 18 compared to an American dime and 22 gauge. So that's what we use for model trains, mostly 22 or 24 gauge for track power. In wiring, you get solid core wiring. That's what's like there, just a single core in the middle. And or standard. These are better. I like the standard one better because they're easier to bend if you have to snake it around places. So it's easier that way. Now, multimeters, a lot of people don't understand multimeters. There's an analog type and there's digital type. The bonus of the digital type, it doesn't matter which way you connect positive and negative. On the analog meter, this is the normal when it's sitting idle. That's the needle sitting here. If you put power to it the proper way, you have to have the positive on the red and the negative on the black lead, and it will show the amount of power here. If you're doing it backwards, you'll actually, that needle try to jump this way. You actually bend the needle sometimes. And you have to, for example, the 250 here, you have to look on here, find what scale here is 250. Be this black one here now would be the 250 range. So you have to do it that way. The digital meters, they're nice that way because they're, DC in this example here, they change around. A lot of these are different commands on, like have much of, you have a diode tester on here. You have, you can do, listen for short type of thing. There's a little beeper on there as well. But the only ones you really need are the ohms, the AC, and the DC, more of the DC and ohms than anything else. So this is an example of a short. This is like a dead short. And that needle normally sits here with a short, and then the needle's right to the very right-hand side. And on a digital scale, it reads as 0. If you have a resistive short, for example, if you're reading across the tracks, a lead on each track, and you see some reading in the middle, that's the coil of the engine that you have on the track, or resistive short, they call it anyway. So, and here, for example, on that resistor, they showed earlier, there were 25 ohms. On here, it would show us a 25 in here, and this will read 25.0 if you read across the resistance. And power readings on DC generally goes from 0 to 16 volts on the tracks. And of course, the more voltage you put on there, the faster the train will run. Now, DCC, the voltage is fully applied. It's there all the time. That's why the lights are working, the sound's working, and so on. And if you're going to take a look at the voltage on the track, you're going to be using a multimeter on AC setting. And it's about 16 volts AC. And if you don't love to find formulas, whatever, there you are. If you want to find the voltage, you take your amps times the resistance, and that'll give you the voltage, and so on and so on. Those are the three formulas for them. Switches. Hear about single pole, single throw. So this is called the pole on this side, the one that has a movable connector. And this would be the terminal over here. So these are the two terminals here. One's a pole, one's the terminal. And that's either open or it's closed. It's very short, like single pole, single throw. Now, this is some single pole, double throw. So he's going to go connect through this one or connect this one. There isn't a condition for open in here. Like this one has open here or it's closed. This one, it's either that way or this way. Single pole, double throw, only one pole over here. So double pole, double throw, you hear that a lot. And there's the two poles here, and then either it's going to go this way or it's going down to this way, and both of them operate at the same time. And there's the center ones are always the pole, and then you got either side of that. And there's an example of a 4-pole double throw. There's the poles in the middle here, and now power supplies. I'm making this simple anyway. So these are typical power supplies. There's a wall wart, and you can use a 9-volt battery or 12-volt battery type of thing. And this is an example. You can buy these kits. This is a Canadian kit, but you put AC voltage in and you get DC voltage out, and it's variable. You can adjust the amount of power by this potentiometer. That's what a pot looks like here. That's a voltage regulator in here. And put a heat sink in there because they do get hot. Now, there's an example for tortoise machines. If you got one power supply, 12 volts, or you could actually do 9 volts power supply for the tortoise as well. Yeah, I think you can go up to 15 or 16 volts on the tortoise. But this example, there's a double pole, double throw, the 2 poles here, and he goes this way or it goes this way. And when the toggles but down, it's physically inside here is connected this way here. So it's connected this way. And the opposite way, of course, down here. So if you want to be able to use a single 12-volt supply with a ground, what you could do is take a double pole, double throw switch and do an X on here, put some wires, solder wires across these. And what happens there in this example, for example, this is the switch up. So this part here will be joined here. So the voltage comes down through here, through the tortoise machine up to ground. If you do the switch the other way, so it's connected down here, your power goes down here, across to here, up to here, around in the verse of the other one. If you want to do 2 panels, or for example, you want to go on each side of the aisle to operate a tortoise machine, for an example, this is where you wire it. This is showing the LEDs. You want to do LEDs in here for which way is the turnout facing. Then you don't have to physically look at the turnout. You just look at the control panel they have here for the LEDs. And on this one side, you do is double pole, double throw switch. And on the other side, you can only need a single pole double throw. But that's an example you do if you want to do it in 2 places at the same time. And you keep on going more and more all the time. I'm going to talk with this one next week. I'm going to be doing the Basic Electrics 102. I'm going to talk this more next week. But this is a typical bringing AC power in here, on-off switch, fuse, transformer, diode bridge. I'll talk with that later on. There's capacitor to level out the DC signal. The voltage regulator regulating this to 12 volts, and this coming out at 18 volts, and this can take it down to 12 volts. You can have it down to 5 volts, 9 volts, whatever. And then there's a LED there to show you the voltage is available coming out here if you want. You don't have to. So there's another way to do if you don't want to make one of these type of things for positive and negative voltage to common ground. You use 2 batteries, and you connect the positive one to the negative of the other one. And what it will look like is like this. So there's a positive and negative connected there. So in this example, you would go from, say, for example, this one here, and assuming the switch is this way here, and then it goes down through here, and to the negative. And in the other way, if the switch is thrown this way, you go from here, of course, down through there, and to this ground, back to that battery. So that, of course, tortoise work with power on one way, or works on the opposite way with the reversed power. There's tortoise contacts. A lot of people don't use these. I'm surprised that really surprises me because it makes it good for powering frogs, for an example. Use the tortoise machine, the extra contacts they have in there. Outside contacts are for the motor itself, either plus or minus 12 over here in the ground. And these are the common ones here, the four. That's a pole. And there's either going to be this terminal or to this terminal here, depending on which way the motor is run. And there's an example here. This one is this is about a 10 amp power supply with an 18-volt center tap. You see the CT in there. Now, I mentioned here, there's a center tap example here. So what you'll end up with here, this one comes with a 12 plus 12 volt. This is going to be minus 12 eventually. And there's a common ground to the middle. So you'll see 18 CT in this example. So I'm taking 120 volts AC in here, bringing out 18 volts AC. Still, a transformer goes from AC to AC. That's for my main power supply for the DCC system. This one is used for my my tortoise machines. So it's 120 volts AC and out to I think it's 10 volts out of here. And then there's a diode bridge. I'm going to explain that next week a bit better. But that makes it from AC to a DC. And there's my system, and I got my track on off switch, my don't turn out switches. There's my magnets anyway. And this one is an example. I have a power shield in here. So most DCC systems, if you get a short, the whole system is shut down. And for example, the guys working in the yard, in this case, I have the yard. This is separated in 4 separate ones. This is for future. Somebody's working on the yard and it causes a short, whatever reason, only the yard shuts down. So that's the one thing for the power shield. There's my positive 12, minus 12, and common there for my tortoise machines. And that's for sound. And I showed this before. I use these splice plates, use them for making roof rafters and stuff like that. And these are really cheap to buy. And use a number 8 self-tapping screw. And there's a heavier wire bringing in the power into here, and then it comes out here into another set of these somewhere else on the layout. And then I take my track power down into here, and then that's a positive lead. There's a negative leads, and that's easier if you have a short like that. You just a matter of taking this off. If the short disappears, and you know somewhere the short's back this way, and if you find the short is in here, then you can just start undoing these one at a time. LEDs, almost at the end here. LEDs, this is general white and blue LED use 3 volts, and some whites are 2 volts. But when you're buying them, make sure you put on the package the actual voltage that they are, because they do differ. Green, yellow, and red use 2 volts generally. And they take about 20 milliamps to work. So LEDs only work with voltage in one direction, but you can buy dual LEDs. So there's an example, red, green. So positive and negative, it makes it go red, and negative to positive makes it go green, for an example. Now, what you can do, this is for a single target as an example. You put this in there, of course, the voltage through a tortoise machine or whatever you're triggering the signal, positive, negative one way, or you do it the other way, negative. But if you do an AC on there as well, and there's a positive and there's a negative, this happens 60 times a second on EC. Red and yellow going 60 times a second is yellow. There's a yellow light color. Nice thing to have. Next week, basic electricity 102. That's it.
Anybody have any questions for Bob?
I do. Bob.
Yes, caller.
Can you go? Hey, that's my line. Can you go back about 3 pictures when you have the 2 NCE units and you're using one as a booster?
Hang on a second here. Where's that one? There we go.
Please
Oh,
hold.
that's NCO. Hang on. There.
Yeah.
Yeah. I haven't. This is not connected yet.
Right. No, I I just got my second booster
Oh, yeah.
and I was just wondering how you connected it.
I haven't connected this one yet. This is for these two are my main units.
The only connection between them is the data cable.
Is this one?
Oh, yeah. Like
Yeah,
that.
the only connection is that gray data cable. You notice there's an extra slot there and you can daisy chain up and you just daisy chain off that.
Oh, yeah, right here.
Yeah,
Okay,
that's-
so this is what this is the only connection, and then this, and I knew that, but I wasn't sure what the connection was between the two.
So what I've done here, Clark, is that from this one, I go with this one here.
Yeah,
That does these two power shields, and this one does here
The-
for these two.
the other two, and that's exactly how I've got that wired so
Right.
far. I just didn't know the connection between the two.
Yeah, actually, I forgot about that. Thanks, Phil, for that.
So,
So do you essentially have two power districts then?
yes,
I have four.
yeah, 4 actually, yeah.
Yeah, there's one.
But you got supply of 5 amps to 2 each.
Yeah, that's
So
a
is
five.
there-
That's a 5.
Is there a booster for each, or how does the booster relate to the power districts?
Well, each one of these is a 5 amp supply. So my layout only needs about 5 amps to run the whole thing, but I have 10 available. This, if I need for future growth, I got another one here. There's another 5 ampere. And I would do that to another power shield. I would buy a separate power shield for that.
Is that an SB5 part number?
I don't know.
No, no, it is not.
Oh,
No, the SB5 is strictly the booster. Those are full 5 amp units.
The ones that Bob's showing are full 5 amp units.
Right.
yeah.
They could be run as an individual unit, or they can be hooked up to provide as one as a booster and one as a master.
So what criteria would you use to select one versus an SB5 versus one of these?
Well, you generally would, how many engine or rolling, or sorry, the power supply, your motive power, depends on how many of them you have. If you have all Atlases, they don't use much more than about 0.6 of an amp.
Of course, I'm running those scale too.
Yeah, and once you have a whole bunch more, then you keep adding more boosters.
Jeremy, how it works is that when you test your draw with all your locomotives on the track, if you're getting up to 4.5, then you'd probably want to split the layout and put a booster on. So now when, let's say you've got half the engines in one area and half in the other, you're only going to be around 2. Do you understand that?
Think so, yeah.
Okay. So
I'm not understanding it and I'm trying real hard to follow it. So
okay.
just to pipe into.
Sure. So if when you test your track with just one unit on, okay? And hold on one sec, guys. Bob, you want to?
Yeah, so
So guys, let me explain it real quick. So you have a layout and you're feeding it with one booster, which is basically generating the DCC power. If the load of the locomotives that are active and moving and that are sitting and just running sound approaches a certain level, and I think the point here is if you got a 5 amp booster, if you ever get up to over 4 amps, you're getting to the point where you probably want to increase your power capability. And the easy way to do that is you break the layout into 2 pieces and you wire that into 2 different boosters. The second advantage with having 2 different boosters is you can physically locate the boosters closer to the track, which has 2 advantages. From a DCC perspective, it reduces the distance, reduces the noise. From a cost perspective, it reduces the wiring cost because your main feeder wires, which tend to be, depending upon the gauge, if you're an O, their 12 gauge wire can become a lot shorter if you've located the boosters close to where the drops are from the layout. So a lot of this depends on how big your layout is too. Does that make sense?
Yep.
Yeah,
Okay.
but I'm not understanding where the two boosters would come together. It would seem to me
So it
you'd
turns
be
out
getting
if you've got,
shorts there, wouldn't
no,
you?
if you've got two pieces of track, what it turns out in that data signal line, there's a timing clock. There's a timing sequence that gets set that sets the timing on all of these the same. So all the boosters are generating basically an AC signal. As long as they all start at the same time going up and down, when the rails are side by side, as long as they're in phase, and this is really important, as long as the rails between where the two boosters touch between the two power districts are in phase, then what happens is you just drive over it. It doesn't matter. Now, the one real problem is you want to make sure they're in phase. Easy to do on a fixed layout, something you have to pay attention to on a modular layout with crossovers, because you may flip the phase at a crossover. But on most layouts, what you do is once you wire it up, it'll stay the same, and the NCE manages the timing so they never get out of phase. So all the power districts your layout always stay in phase with each other. So as long as it wired, and that's what, by the way, that's why you want to buy a ramp meter, because it's a really easy way to check that. Because you just take the two wires that are gapped between the two blocks and you put the ramp meter on one side between the rails. If you don't get voltage, they're in phase. If you get voltage, they're out of phase. And by the way, out of phase voltage is really bad. I had a Bachmann ON30, one of the 2662s that actually stopped with the tender on one side of a break between power districts and the engine on the other side. And it turned out there was a foof, there was a black foof, and I thought it was the decoder. It actually turned out it was the wires that run between the engine and the tender. They all became a fuse and evaporated. So, because when you put, it actually turns out, because it turns out it's additive, right? When you're 180 degrees out of phase, one's going up and down 16, the other's going up and down opposite 16. So you actually have 32 volts between them. So getting stuff in phase in multi-unit power districts is really important. And you notice all the wiring on the diagram here maintain the same orientation by color. And that's the easiest way to make sure you're always in phase.
Yeah.
So yeah, enough said.
One thing
For example, here, the yard here is totally separated from the main section, and that's totally separated from the ferry yard here too. They're all
And I'm assuming those are circuit breakers there.
yeah.
Yeah. So basically what you've got is, in this case, you probably have one booster feeding two circuit breakers.
Yes, right here. Yeah. And there's the other two.
There's two kind of rules happening here. One rule is the rule of power needs, and that's how many of the boosters you need on the top in black. The second is identification of problems. And you put in circuit breakers more than the boosters. Now you divided the layout into 4 areas. So if you have a short, you now know it's in this quarter of the layout. So the more you narrow things down as you do the distribution and this stuff, and the more circuit breakers you put in, the more isolation you get.
Listen, guys, I hate to stop this, but we've got to move on right now, and we can come back to this after our featured modeler and continue this discussion, because I really think this is great. And Bob, what this really shows is how important your discussion was. And I appreciate, again, you coming forward and wanting to do this. So now I'd like to introduce, well, before I do, let me mention again, we have a door prize tonight. David Rarick is the donor of the HO scale engine terminal that he built on our show over a period of over a month. And it's a card model, and he is graciously donating that to an HO scale modeler. And we're going to award it tonight in a door prize. It'll be a random drawing from the HO scale modelers who have put in the chat either the word enter or the word win. And either word is fine, but if you'll put in the chat one of those words, then you're automatically entered in this contest drawing tonight that we'll be doing right after our next guest. And that guest is Steve Wolcott. Steve is a fantastic man himself. and he owns a company called Pre-Size Model Specialties. Steve, I really appreciate you wanting to be here this evening, and welcome.
Well, thanks for having me. I bought the company about 6 years ago. It came with about 100 products, and the former owner came out to visit me and showed me the ropes, how to cast resin, how to make the silicone molds. And then from there, I learned by trial and error. And since then, we've added another 50 or 60 products to the line. Mostly what came were scenery items like tunnel portals, bridge piers, bridge abutments, culverts, items like that. And if I can get this to work here. The easiest way for me to show you this is to show the website. And you can see the website has different scales. So we can go, how do we scroll down? We can go to HO, which is a more popular scale, and we have abutments, bridge piers, you know, so it's easy to find different kinds of products. And what's been really interesting to me is adding new products, and which means, let's see here. A lot of the new products come from requests from modelers. And so somebody will call up and say, you know, can you make the Hoosac Tunnel portal? And, you know, he'll send me some drawings, some photos, and, you know, we'll come up with a product. That, to me, that's the interesting, the creative part of doing this. And so we have done quite a few items like that. And the other way we get new products, one of the other ways is people will actually send me a master that they have made, something like this. So a modeler made this tunnel portal and sent it to me and said, make copies of it and make it available. So same thing happened with the bridge shoes. So for instance, in O scale, a gentleman called up and said, I'm modeling Soldier Summit. Can you make the tunnel portals for Soldier Summit in O scale? And so he sent photos and dimensions that he wanted, and that's what we came up with. Now, personally, I'm in S scale, and what I've been doing in S scale as a challenge to myself is doing freight car kits. So we started out with a composite general service gondola. And if you look at photos of it, it can look like a complicated car. But if you start out with a one-piece body and you don't have to assemble a flat kit, then it takes a lot of the finicky work out of assembling the model. So a one-piece casting includes the sides, ends, floors, And then we have a separate piece for the inner floor that covers a lead weight. So we have weight in the car. And it makes it a lot easier to come up with a car like this. And then a minor scale like S scale or O scale, where you don't have hundreds of offerings of ready to run models. This is one of the best ways, to get those models that various modelers are looking for. And so we've done several. We've done a flat car, TTX flat car, steel GS gone, a number of different cars. This Greenville gondola. So to me, this is the most interesting part of the business is, coming up with new and different products. And of course, at some point in the future, the resin casting process will probably be put out of business by 3D printing. And that's starting to happen in the smaller scales. But when you get into the larger scales like S and O, the cost for 3D printing an entire car just gets too high. And so it makes more sense to use urethane casting when you're talking about, 50 units or 100 units or even 150 units. And of course, in something like, if you want 1,000 or 2,000 or 3,000 cars like you might have in HO scale, then it makes more sense to use, a styrene injection molding. But this is the process right now that works the best, for smaller runs of cars and, different scenery items. And it's it's been an interesting learning process. I'd never done this kind of work, this kind of casting before, but it's been an interesting learning experience.
Steve, do you plan to produce more car kits?
Yep, right now I'm finishing up a Southern Pacific single sheet automobile boxcar that should be coming out in about a month. And I plan to keep, working on car kits, generally coming out with probably 1 or 2 a year as we go along. A lot of these car kits came the same way, where a modeler called up and said, I started this car, I built a scratch-built version of the car, can you turn it into a kit? And that's where a lot of these came from. Some of them came from a guy who printed the car or designed the car in 3D CAD and had one printed, and then I can take that, use it as a master and produce the car out of that. And
What scale are you going to limit yourself to the S scale for the cars, or are you going to do it in other scales?
Well, it just depends on the interest and the demand. So far, the interest is coming from the S scale, and that's probably just because that's where I started. But I have made parts for cars in HO and O for other car kits, other manufacturers. I've done the casting for them, but I haven't done full cars in other scales. Not to say that I won't. And I know there's some really good car kits coming out in HO, highly detailed, and I think they're pretty well covered there by a couple of different companies. I'm not sure I know there's car kits in O scale too, but I'm not as familiar with them.
Are you making your parts that you're doing for other manufacturers? Are you also making those available in your to the general public?
Usually not. Usually, you know, the manufacturer that asks me to do that, they want to keep control of that part.
Gotcha.
Now, let's see, in S scale, we have a lot of, let me get here. Freight car parts. Buttons, bridge piers. We have a lot of detail parts available in S scale. We've got, you know, car ends. We've got coil covers for different cars. And then we have a whole line of underbody parts for passenger cars in S scale. For modelers who want to detail their passenger cars.
Well, being a trolley modeler, I got to ask, what about trolley modeling?
So far, I haven't got into it, but you know, I'm open to it. Send me a master.
Gotcha. Well, I tell you, it sounds exciting to me. Why did you buy the company? What got you involved in becoming a model railroad manufacturer?
Well, I have a fairly typical beginning story where, you know, I got a American Flyer train set when I was 3 years old or so, which meant, you know, my dad probably used it more than I did for a couple of years, but I grew up with that and kept adding to it, and you know, lost interest at high school at some point, and then decided to get back into it. Built a room for a layout, which my kids took over with a pool table when they finally moved out. And I started thinking about building a layout. My dear wife said, well, why don't you think about doing something that makes money instead of just spending money? So I thought about that and came across an ad in a magazine for this business and decided to go with it. I've always enjoyed making things, problem solving, doing things with my hands. And so it went from there.
I think it's fantastic that you decided to do it because that, you know, those kind of companies, if somebody doesn't step up when they're on the market to be sold, they just go out of business.
Right. And the thing that really gives me a lot of satisfaction is knowing that every product that I send out is helping somebody else fulfill their dream and make it part of their dream and help them make it come true.
Fantastic. Well, let me open this up. I don't want to be the only one asking questions. Anybody else have any questions for Steve?
Yeah, I have a question. What is the material that you cast it in? Is it like rosin? Is it?
It's called urethane resin.
Oh, okay.
And it comes in as a two parts, and you mix them together. And you've got about 30 seconds before they harden up when you mix them together.
So it's a separate cast each time?
Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay. Thank you.
Yeah. And of course, you can buy
question on your casting technique. How do you get the air bubbles out of your resin mix in the 30 seconds available to you?
Well, for the tunnel portals and those scenery items, it's usually not a problem because it's a one-piece mold. The detail part of the mold is down, and so the bubbles will naturally rise up away from the surface that you're going to see. Now, in the car kits, where it is more of an issue because you're going to see both the top and the bottom, the sides, the inside, the outside. you pour the resin into the mold, usually a 2-piece mold. And as soon as you've poured the resin, you put the mold in a pressure pot and apply about 45 PSI into the pressure pot, and that collapses the bubbles down. And then once the
So
resin sets-
instead of trying to vacuum them out and bubble them out, you compress them. Clever. Oh,
Right.
put
Yeah.
pressure on the outside. Okay, cool.
Now you can get them.
I've never heard anybody do that before.
Oh, well,
I've always heard you try to vacuum them out is what I've always heard.
well, I know some people do that, but to do that, you have to have a longer setting resin. You have to have more time because you have to pull the bubbles out before you pour it in the mold, and then pour it in the mold. Now, you do have to use a vacuum. I have to use a vacuum making a mold to get the bubbles out of the silicone material that the molds are made out of. But that material takes 48 hours to set up, so I've got plenty of time to suck
Right.
the bubbles out in something like
Right.
that. Now you can get these casting materials, in small quantities through Micromark and other outfits, and there are YouTubes online that can show you how to do it. If you want to make your own master and make a dozen copies of whatever, it's another little interesting tool or skill to learn.
Absolutely.
Steve, this is Greg. I have a question.
Yeah.
I saw when you were showing some of the S-scale car parts, you had some end doors for auto box cars. Have you given any thought to making those in HO scale?
The reason I have those in S scale is because the gentleman sent them to me, a 3D printed master. So anybody who wants to send me a master, of something like that, we can make the parts and make them available.
Okay, I'm going to pass this on to a guy in our club. He's trying to scratch build something like that and said the hard part's going to be the doors. So maybe it won't be so hard now. Thank you.
That way he just has to make one.
For your masters, do you have a preferred material that you would like to have folks send you?
I've used a lot of different materials for masters. A lot of people use styrene. A lot of them come, like I say, as 3D printed parts. And in that case, it doesn't really matter which material they're 3D printed in. You're going to get an exact copy. So if there are print lines in the master, they'll show up in the casting. And of course, if you're just doing one, you can take the time to sand those out in a lot of cases. Now, a lot of the bigger pieces like the tunnel portals and bridge piers and so on, they come in all different materials. They come in wood. I've made a number of them out of styrofoam, blue board, and some of them are made out of individual plaster bricks that are laid up with, like bricks into the model. So it's pretty wide open what you can use, but you'll just get whatever you use, you'll get an exact copy. If there's wood grain in the master, it'll show up in the casting.
Steve, what about structure kits? Are you thinking about it doing one of those?
I haven't given that much thought, but it's always a possibility. I'm not retired. I have a full-time job running a ranch. So that's the main limit to what I can produce particularly as far as masters, is how much time I have. And of course, I got more time in the winter than I do in summer to work on this stuff.
Any other questions for Steve?
Yes, Steve, you mentioned that you bought the company 6 years ago.
Yeah.
All right. Well, the thing is, I just recently purchased, I guess, one of your, I guess it's 140 or something like that. But the thing is that I think there was more, I think the dust was older than that. So it might have been before you.
Look, what's the address on the back of that label?
The address is Carson City, Nevada.
That was probably produced 15 or more years ago.
Okay.
That was 2 or 3 owners before me.
2 or 3 owners. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, it still looks pretty good at all that. I'm still in the process of building the diorama that it's going to go onto. And I was going to say I completely forgot my question, but the question I have is that, well, this is obviously a little bit darker gray color. I'm doing something that's more towards where I live, which is in southern Vermont, where the color is a little bit more marble-ish, if that makes any sense.
Mm-hmm.
What would be a good way to sort of like lighten it up so it's more marble?
Well, the first thing to do before you start coloring it is to wash it with dish detergent in warm water to get the mold release off of it. After that, you can use just about anything, any kind of stain or paint or weathering powders on this material, and it'll work pretty good on just about any of those.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep.
Any other questions for Steve? Well, Steve, I wish you the very best with your company, and thank you again so much for taking the time to be with us this evening. I really do appreciate it, and have certainly enjoyed meeting you and talking with you.
Thanks for having me. It's been nice. It's been fun.
Well, that's great. And again, best of luck on your company.
Thank you.
Now, we have a winner for the door prize. And the person who won it is a Zoom member tonight, Dave W. And that's all the information I've been given. So Dave W., who are you? Hello?
It's Dave Weatherald in Barrie, Ontario.
Well, Dave, great, fantastic. And I really hope that you enjoy the kit. If you will send me your address, your full address and name and so forth to my email address, I'll get it to David, and he'll put the model in the mail to you. And once you get the model, if you get a chance, we'd appreciate knowing how you're going to use it and see it on your railroad.
It might be on mine, and it might be on the Barrie Allendale Railway Modelers Club layout.
Well, either one, I'd love to see how you're going to use it. And I know you're going to enjoy it because they did just a beautiful job. And it's something kind of special for a person from the show to be willing to donate the work that they made on the show. And Dave, I don't know whether you finally got on the show or not, but if you did, thank you so very much for the donation. And again, if you will send me your complete name and address, then I will put it in an email to David, and we'll get it in the mail to you. Do you have my email, or do you want me to give it to you?
I'm sure it's up on the NixTrainz website somewhere.
It is, and it's Jim Kello. So if you'll just send me an email, then I'll tell Dave, and we'll go from there. And again,
Will
what was
do
your
after-
what was your full name? I'm sorry, sir.
Dave Weatherald.
Weather.
No, Wetherald.
Got it. All right, Mr. Weatherall, thank you so much for being here this evening. I hope you enjoy it. And again, keep in mind when you get it, because I'd love to see how you're going to get on your model railroad or the course layout.
Have a good night, guys.
Thank you so much. Now, guys, if you'd like to continue the discussion that you were having about the electrical system, we can do that. So you'll have to tell me whether that was finished when I cut you off, or whether you'd like to continue that for a little while.
One thing I was wondering about, when I see discussions about Digitrax, they have what Digitrax likes to call a ground connection between each of the boosters. Is that not applicable to NCE?
No, yeah, you just have to do that cord you saw on the picture there. The one cord goes to the other one. It basically is telling it what to do. Excuse me. It's just a communication cable. It doesn't need the ground.
I think it's just a system design thing,
Yeah, definitely.
right? So in the Digitrax guys did it. They decided having a ground bus across the layout was a good idea, and the NCE guys didn't. So I'm not sure whether
on the Digitrax, I understand it's not a true ground, but it's sort of a reference for data point.
right. It's probably more of a data ground then.
That's right.
No, gentlemen, it's a booster common.
It's boosted.
It's a ground, it's a common path back on a return line for the power from the layout. It's a heavy ground, it's a heavy common wire from case to case, from booster to booster.
But I think he's right in calling it a common, because a ground is only a ground if it goes right back to the power supply, which goes back to the ground in the circuit breaker box. So I don't think they do that. They might, but I don't think they do. So it's a common drain more than anything else to take your errors voltages away.
It helps when you're moving from across power districts between boosters to give that common return back. That's one of the phase issues that comes into play. But there should be, there's separate power supplies feeding each booster. Don't use a common power supply between boosters, and that will cause even more problem.
That's correct. The common power supply will really screw up your boosters. But in Digitrax nomenclature, if you look at the command and the booster stations, they actually refer to that common green connection as a ground.
Yes, and
so
yeah,
it's a case ground or a what I would call a board ground. It goes right to the circuitry, but it does not connect to say the water pipe ground in your house.
it does connect to your ground. That is correct. And all of the, however many boosters that you have, all of them should be connected to that common.
Correct.
Right, and it's supposed to prevent a phase switching between the boosters, but that never happens on NCE.
No, the NCE is done internally by that date. it's essentially the same thing by having that plug. Phil will probably, he probably knows it better than I do, but by having those plugs, that data connection is basically the same thing that ground wire is doing, but it's internal, so to speak.
So the reality is there should never be any cross current between boosters.
Right.
Right, because if you think about it, I've got a ground wire down here, 2 ground wires down here at the bottom, and I've got feeders coming in up here at the top. And all the current from 1 has to drain in this area, all the current from 2 has to drain in this area. There never should be anything going between them. So connecting them together is actually not really electrically that huge of a requirement. Quite frankly, I think you can attest it probably to where they were designed.
Yeah.
I mean, one was designed in a place where it's like, do we need to have a wire between these? No, there's really no reason for it because they're isolated. I mean, they're isolated in how they're wired, so there's no real reason to have them connected together. But if you're doing it in Germany, it's like we have to have a ground between everything because that's part of the requirements here in the EU for wiring stuff, guaranteed.
But this is not an earth ground.
No, but it's the logic of saying, I don't want these things floating between them either. It's an engineering decision that, again, I don't think really matters. Now, the difference is, in fact, the reality is, as long as you've got the black rails and the red rails the right way, you don't have a phasing issue. The problem only comes if you've got some sort of a crossover. You know, as long as your track is a loop, you don't have an issue. Now, if you've got a return loop, you've got to do something about that anyway because you've got a phasing issue. The problem with phasing shows up more in modular, where you do different setups. Because if you've got a module that's got a crossover on it, right, where normally on a module you come in up here and you leave at the top, right? So if the module is a rectangle, you come in close to one side and leave close to the same side, and so the phasing is defined based on the rail being there when you plug them together. But if you take that rail and you cross it over through the middle of the module, now your rails are contiguous. And you know, if you think about it, if this was red and black up here, red, black, when I flip it around, it's red, black, but these came through the other way. So now it's out of phase there. So when you do modular, you have to shift. If you do a modular layout with 4 or 5 power blocks, you often have to shift the phase if there are any crossover modules. So that's where you really run into phase issues. That was a long, detailed discussion, wasn't it?
No, and you're almost all the way there. The primary concern on those phase issues when you have multiple power districts that are fed from the same booster, because then you will actually have a dead short as you bridge across from one power district to another. The booster common comes into play when you go from a power district fed by one booster to a power district fed by a second, and that booster common will carry current only for the brief time as the locomotive is completing its transit from the one district to the next. That's the entire purpose of the common. That's the only time it actually sees current flow, is as that locomotive is crossed over. Gurry's site, can't think of his first name now. There's been long, extended discussions about that on the NCE.io group, and Gurry's site is the reference for that. Can't think of the actual site name now. There was one other question that came up. Somebody was asked about whether those boosters were SB5s or not. And the SB5s are full 5-amp boosters, but their internal brains are more along the lines of a power cab. So they don't have the capability to deal with all of the, with a large number of cabs that the full NCE system can use.
Yeah, I had asked that question, but the SB5, according to NCE literature, can support six throttles. Because I have a power cab right now. So
Yeah,
if I had one of those units, I can support 6 cabs, which is plenty for me.
Right.
Or I can get a second one and support 12 presumably.
The full on now, going with 2 smart boosters will not increase your cabs because they're sharing. Only one of those is acting as a command station. The other would just be acting as a dumb booster. The full-on powerhouse system, or whatever Power Pro, whatever nomenclature it's using, can support 63 cabs.
Okay.
yeah. Jeremy, one is the SB5 is basically just to get you up to the 5 amps, but really doesn't change your cab capability.
Okay.
Right.
The other thing is the SB5 does not have a programming track output. You use your power cab for that.
Right.
As a separate standalone system to feed your programming track.
Yeah, I think there's this point, Jeremy, I think there's this important point in NCE that if you buy a power cab, you come to a point where you have to decide whether or not the power cab can continue to be the intelligence for the system.
Right.
Because the power cab, most of the intelligence is built into the power cab. And when you buy that module, all you're doing is upgrading to 5 amps. But if you want the additional features, you have to buy the intelligence in a base. And then your power cab just becomes a dumb cab.
Yeah. Now,
I mean, it's not necessarily bad, don't get me wrong. And so if you look at their pricing like they have the pricing for a 5 amp booster, but a regular 5 amp booster. And then they have the pricing of the 5 amp booster with the smarts. And that's actually, then what happens is you buy that and use that to power the layout. And that's probably, it's a bit more expensive, but it's probably a safer migration path, quite frankly.
now the other thing is what a lot of people do, especially clubs and that, they don't hook up a programming track to your main line per se.
Right.
They'll have a bench and you use that power cab plug-in, the one with the power in it, and you plug in your power cab and now you've got all your programming on a separate track.
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm doing right now.
Yeah. And you can hook that up to your, JMRI, etc. I think the power cab is a very versatile piece, and I think people starting off with it it's like a computer, you're going to build onto the system as your requirements change.
But I think, Clark, there is an important point. When you make the decision to go from the basic power cab, you need to decide, you kind of need to make the decision there, because if you invest in the path of keeping the power cab as the smarts,
right,
most of those investments, they don't necessarily have great value when you decide to go the other path.
I totally agree.
And it's 2 migration paths you kind of need to choose. And I think if you're really thinking about building a layout and want to have, especially if you think about having more than 1 booster in the future because of your location or distance, then I think just saying, great, I use the power cab, I can use it, I can set it up on my workbench and take it from the layout to my workbench and use it there for my test layout, but I can use it on my main layout, that's just another cab.
That's right, exactly.
And I think that's kind of a decision process you have to go. And boy, I'm not an expert on this, I'm just, what little I know about NC, it seems like that's a decision point.
Yep. And that's, we, at our club, we start off with a power cab. Then we went to a full 5 amp system. Now, a lot of the guys bought for their own home layout, bought a power cab because they're only running 2 and 3 engines, like Jeremy suggested.
Yep.
And then all they had to do was bring the other cable to the club and plug in, and now they have their own throttle.
Yep.
And then when we got to a point, we went with a total 5 amp system because we couldn't run the trains. And even on my own layout, I've gone to 2 5 amp systems because I have probably 26 locomotives sitting in 2 yards. So I've split the 2 yards into each power district. So now I've only got 12 locomotives sitting on one 5-amp system. So I've got and they're all new motors. So they're they're drawing maybe 0.6. And when they're just sitting there, they're even drawing less than that.
I think one of the important points that happened in my cellar probably 15 years ago was Tony Parisi, Tony's Trains came in. He was more than happy to sell me anything I wanted. But he looked and I said, Tony, I think I want another booster. And he said, why do you want another booster? And I said, because I don't know how many engines I'm going to use and how much it's going to be and all that. And he said, well, why don't you let me sell you a ramp meter? And then when you put all your locomotives on the layout and you turn all the bells and whistles on, then you know exactly how much current is being drawn from that one booster that you've got. And so that was kind of nice. It's kind of like a gas gauge. Actually, It's like a speedometer in a car.
Yeah.
You can go 50 miles an hour and anything over 50 miles an hour and you're going to pay the price.
So is there any reason to go with a ramp meter 3 or 4, or is the ramp meter 2 sufficient?
I'm sorry, say again, Jeremy?
There's 4 different versions of that product. I'm assuming that I want to get ramp meter 2 with a case, but I don't think I need 3 and 4 based on what I quickly read.
I got the cheapest one, and if I could move that camera over there, all you do is see it mounted. It has 4 screw holes into a piece of plywood.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. The
all you
version
need.
2, version 2 is just a case of some sort.
Yep.
So I
got
missed the
the,
conversation because I went to go get my ramp meter in the case. This is the one without the battery. So the next one and the reason why I like the case for one thing only is because I throw it in my tackle box, my toolkit, and I can go and check anybody's DCC layout and know exactly what's going on.
Yeah.
I can also test my own.
Yeah,
Now, in my fascia, I have 2 number 2s, 1 for each booster. So I know, just as you said, Nick, I know exactly what the power draw is.
Yeah.
And what the amperage is.
Yep. Those ramp
I
meters.
got myself one the same as Clark had there. And when it hit 4.6 amps, I knew I had to go out and put in a booster. So that answered my question.
Yep.
Money well spent.
Yeah. People think it's the size of the layout, and it's not. It is strictly the power consumption that you're using.
You're just measuring, and locomotives is all you're concerned about. Is that right?
No, you if you've got caboose with lights in it, it's drawing power off your system.
Anything that's a resistance load of any level on the track draws current. LEDs that are on the track, any DCC powered, all those cool things like rabbits that you can buy, or hares to power your tortoises. Yep. They all draw power from the DCC.
And don't forget the capacitors that we now put on our locomotives to prevent dropouts. When they're charging, they draw a lot of juice. As I said, 4.6 amps, and my layout had stopped working.
And so is that the reason for LCC coming along?
No.
To some, well,
LCC is completely different.
No, this is just a DCC power issue. It's no different than in your house. If you decided to plug in 30 fans in your bedroom, you're going to have a problem.
I thought the reason for LCC was to take the electrical load off the track.
Yeah, but potentially that could take those accessories off. But if you don't have those accessories, they're not on there. If you're using any other, form of jam or eye control, the Chubb stuff, that's all separate from DCC already. So it's just, the point I think was, it's engine load too. And it's that engine startup load. When you turn the layout on and there's 12 engines and they all have keep alives, and all those keep alives have a charge rate. So your initial current draw is not an idling engine. It's all those keep alives charging up.
Oh, I see. Okay. And then once the keep alive are charged up, then the voltage drops.
Well, then the current demand. So an engine has three types of current demand. There's call it, for lack of a better word, the idling current demand, and that's what it takes to run the speakers when the engine's just sitting there. Then it's got, a load current demand when it's pulling a train.
Okay.
The thing there is, normally on a layout, you only have one or two engines pulling a load, but you may have a lot of engines just sitting there idling. So when you add that up, it may only be 2 or 2.5 amps, and that all works great. But the point that Jim made is, you all of a sudden turn the layout on and all those keep alives are charging up, and the capacitors that you put in all your cabooses are lighting up, and all those passenger cars that all have LEDs in them, you put a capacitor in those, all those things are now drawing power at power up. And so all of a sudden you can go from a 2 amp load when just kind of stasis with engines running to 4.5 amps charging stuff up. I think that's what you were saying, Jim, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Inrush.
So it's that inrush current, which you can't control really unless you try to stage the tracks to come online in some sequence.
Geez, guys, this even makes sense to me.
It's actually not that, this stuff's really not that complicated, guys. If everybody makes it complicated, DCC is really, really, really simple. There's a real simple set of variables, right? How many engines do you want to control? How many cabs do you want to have? That's kind of defined from the railroad you want to build. And once you've defined that, that's going to define in any product you want, which pieces you need to buy. And then you need to look at your layout, and you need to look at your layout in really 2 dimensions, right? One is, what's the current load going to be on the layout? So where am I going to draw current based on the blocks? And the second is, how do I want to segment the layout in 2 ways? One for what I'm going to call troubleshooting. So the reason you make things smaller is that when something fails, it's easy to go find where it fails, right? If your whole layout is wired as one thing and you get a short, it's a bear to go figure out where it is. But if you break that same thing up into 12 pieces, you get a short. Now you only have to look at 1/12 of the layout. And so
each one of those 12 pieces a cab?
No, those are so the cab. The way to think about DCC is, there are 2 sides to DCC, and they meet in this kind of controller thing. One side is the cabs, and that's where human beings put inputs into the system. So cabs can be a physical cab you hold. It can be an application in your phone talking through a computer, or it can be JRMI. Those are all inputs to the system. The output goes to the track and goes to the locomotives. So it's really just, and the thing in the middle is the thing that links those together. And on the track side, you can have more boosters for more power, but you have to have that one thing that is the smarts. That's the brains of the system. What it does is, when you push number 2 on the cab that you want the whistle to blow, your cab has to send that signal to that control unit. It has to interpret that and say, oh, you're signaling for locomotive 45 and you want to send CV2, and I need to send that out. So then it sends that to the next side, which turns it into that digital signal that gets sent out on DCC. So the smarts are that thing. You always, every vendor has to have that smarts. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Yeah.
And so what happens on the other side is you have to decide now, how many discrete points do I want to break my layout up into? What's the distance to them? Because you want to keep the distance about 30 feet from a booster maximum. And then what you want to do is look at, how much do I want to do? How much current do I have in each of those areas? And that defines what equipment you want. It's really not a very complicated process.
This one thing that you made your hand with, that every DCC has to have, how many of those do you have to have?
you just have one of them. There's only one. In every DCC system, there's only one place that does the smarts.
So
The
then,
smart
command
gets
station.
replicated. So that was that gray cable. Remember what you saw on that diagram? There was one unit and it had the black cable going into it, which is the cab. That's where the smarts lives. And then there was a gray cable that went down to the next booster. What happens is the smarts get sent, the interpreted smarts get sent across that cable so they get added in the next machine.
is a booster a transformer?
No, a booster is actually, it does a transforming function. So the DCC signal is like an AC signal, but it's not like the AC you get in the wall. The AC you get in the wall is a nice, pretty nice, smooth thing. DCC is much more of a squarish wave, and it can carry within it, it carries the data signal. And so basically what a booster does, it takes the 110 volt power and it creates that waveform, and then it adds on the digital signal so that it gets sent out on the rails. Every decoder does two things. It uses those big arcs, just like AC power, to power it, but then it takes the little digital signals out and gives that to the microprocessor that says this is what I should do. So what happens is when you hit that button 2, that signal gets sent to the control unit, and the control unit says, oh, I need to add this on to the output. And what it does, it adds it onto the output as, engine 45 CV2. What happens is where the smarts sit, it sends that down the cable to the next booster, and it does the same thing. So each booster is adding that little bit of information out into the area for all the engines that are listening to it. Does that make sense? If you want, I'll do a diagram or something and explain it. It's really not that complicated.
Actually, if I may, in Burlington, we have a big lake. They take water in from the lake into a treatment plant. And so the treatment plant is the booster. It's kind of where it pumps all the power up to get the water up into water towers. The water towers are like the green units that say yes or no, something's happening, we got to turn this off, and they shut a whole town down. Okay, you can also have green units farther on down. So you branch out to maybe North Burlington and South Burlington and West Burlington and East Burlington, and each one has a leg. And that's what the booster does. The booster's the water tower, and it sends water down to each of the sections of the town. And that if it's set up conservatively, it has a way to turn it off, so that if one of the towns has a big water main break, then other towns can still have water until they fix up the town with a water line break. And the water line break is like a short circuit. If you have a locomotive that goes off the track over there, then over here and over here and over here, the other districts can keep on running.
So whether I have to have 1, 2, or 4 boosters in the water tank depends on how many districts I've got.
Yes and no. The booster can be like the water plant that feeds all the water tanks. The booster is kind of a big thing.
Okay.
And how many people or how many locomotives are going to be requiring water or electricity from that booster? If the city gets big enough and the water tank is big enough, then not everybody's going to get good water pressure. Then the same thing with the locomotive. If the booster is so big and you have a lot of locomotives or a lot of things that are using up that electricity, has a current draw, then it won't work. There's not enough to go around. So that at that point, and why the ramp meter or the amp meter
is a good thing is it's kind of a meter. It says, this is okay. This is getting kind of busy. I'm hurting. I'm not going to be able to work anymore. I'm not going to be able to supply enough anymore. So that's when it's time to put another booster on the system. And when you put another booster on a system, then it's kind of nice to break it up into parts. Did that make sense?
Nick makes a good point there. The only point is that you cannot count the number of blocks. You cannot count the number of locomotives. You can't take a tape measure to the length of your trackage. The only thing that works is an ammeter, and that's ramp meter, works on DCC current. And that's the tool, like a doctor's stethoscope, that tells you whether or not you need a booster.
Yeah.
Let me ask you one last question, and I'll shut up. So, all right, so I got my booster.
Yep.
And now I've hit 4.6 amps.
Yep.
So now I need a second booster.
Yes.
What, where do I put the booster, the second one, that's part of my question.
Mhm.
And how do I divide my layout then to where one part is for booster 1 and one part is for booster 2?
Can I kind of address that, Jim? So let me show you, let me share my screen. I want to share this. So this is an NCE, and this is not using the power cab. This is using the pro cab side of things. So you basically have 3 components here. So you have this pro cab, which is where the human being inputs are input, and those go over here to these control points. And so they have 2 kinds of control points. This one up here integrates a booster. You notice? So notice it has 2 sets of connectors here, right? This one down here doesn't integrate a booster, only has 1 set of connectors. And then you go over here, and these are just boosters. So they just have the input and the output to be a booster. So the way this works is that you have a number of these. You can have multiples of these. You have to have one of these that does the control. It can be an integrated unit, or you can buy something like ProCab, which really integrates all 3 of these together into a starter system.
Power cab.
Or power cab, excuse me, not power cab. And so what happens now is I get a certain amount of power from this booster, or if I buy this one, I'm not getting any power from it because it's not a booster, it's just a control. Then I add the boosters, and the boosters are just purely based on how much current you need on the layout. So that's the power side of things. Then the other side of things from the layout is how many districts do I want out there with circuit breakers? Because you can do exactly what was shown there is you take 1 booster and you go to 2 circuit breakers. Or what we're doing actually on our O-scale layout, which we're doing 1 circuit or 1 booster, which is 10 amps, will go to 4 circuit breakers. And the reason we're doing more circuit breakers is it allows you to isolate things. We're doing it because we're actually overlaying a DCC option, but you also can do it just to isolate for troubleshooting. So it's actually 2 different issues, right? How many kind of power districts you need and circuit breakers is defined by how much you want to segment the layout. How many boosters you need is defined by the current demand and potentially how big the layout is, because you may want to have the boosters closer out to the edge points for distance for the DCC signal.
The only thing I'd like to add to that, Ed, sorry, Phil, that I'd like to add to that is when Jim asked how to determine where to put a booster, that's a little bit of a wild ass guess to begin with, unless you have an ammeter on each side of those boosters, and then you can balance. Then you could balance that, or have 1 meter and put it between the 2, so that half the layout electrically would balance the other half of the layout electrically.
But so for example, one of the things we have a passenger yard. And if soon as at some point I walk through it, because I actually have the diagrams of how we kind of did this, scale out. So we have passenger yard, and we had a freight yard. And so we made sure those were on two different boosters because the demand on those is kind of constant. The passenger yard demand is driven by lights in the cars if you don't turn the tracks off.
Hold it just a sec. How did you determine the size of the layout for the passenger yard booster?
So we actually started with 3 booster locations. So we actually said we got to figure out, and the booster locations were chosen by distance and length of the layout. The layout's 115 feet long. So you have to have boosters, multiple boosters to keep within that 30 to 35 foot distance. We have a DCC layout currently that runs on a 2-block DC system with centralized control. And what they did is put a switch in that either switches between DCC or 2 DC boosters. And it turns out that is absolutely the worst way you can do DCC because we're running through wires that are 4 inches apart, which guarantees you get a whole whack of noise. And we're running from the central location 60 feet to the end, and we're running basically star wiring out to all those locations, which turns the whole thing into an aerial. I mean, the noise levels are unbelievable. So
let me go back. Let me go back and try to ask my question a different way. I've got an engine terminal. I've got a passenger yard. I've got a freight car yard. And then I've got just mountains and valleys and so forth. Well, in the engine terminal, I'm going to have a lot of engines. So I would define how many feet of my total layout the engine terminal would occupy, and I would hook up a booster to that segment of my layout. Am I right so far?
So far, so good.
Okay.
I think what you want to do is you'd want to define what the load is of the yard.
I'm assuming the load is going to be 4 amps in my defined.
Then that would take a booster. Yes, that's
Okay.
then you would.
And so I would say, okay, my 8-foot section here is my engine terminal. That needs a booster. So I would wire a booster to that track and isolate that track from the rest of the layout. Is that right?
Well,
I'd say area more than track, but yeah, I agree.
So each one of those yard tracks has feeders coming down. They probably go to switches in most layouts. In a pure DCC layout, they'd all just be wired together. When you wire your layout, you would bring all those wires together into one pair of wires that supported the whole yard. And that pair of wires would go to a specific booster then.
Yeah.
Okay. So if my engine terminal is 8 feet in length, any track past that distance, if a locomotive hit that extra 9 feet, it would stop. Is that right?
If you didn't, what you do?
No, it would be because those tracks are powered by a different booster.
Therefore, it would stop, right?
No, because no, it doesn't work that way. So the way it works is
if I don't have boosters for it, it would stop. Is that right?
Right. Well, if you didn't have boosters for the rest of the layout, you only have boosters for that one part. Yes, then it would stop. Yes.
Okay. All right. So then I've got my 8-foot engine terminal. That's booster 1. I got an 8-foot passenger yard. That's booster 2. I got a 9-foot freight yard. That's booster 3. And booster 4 is the rest of the layout. So I've accumulated wires in 4 different parts of my layout. And those four accumulated wires go to each booster. And each booster then has a data cable that goes to my main terminal.
Okay.
And then I have my walk around hand throttles that are hooked into my main terminal.
Yep.
And that's
Well,
the,
that's essentially the architecture. And the only thing is, you may find, for example, that, you know, you can take half the layout and the freight yard and half the layout in the passenger yard, and they work just fine, because it turns out
I've
that,
got enough amps there. I don't have.
right, and when it also turns out, there's an interesting thought process here, because it's usage, right? When you turn the layout on, none of the engines are running. So the layout has to deal with that inrush current. If that's high, then you probably have enough current for all the engines you want to run later. So, because it turns out the freight yard use goes way up and then comes down. The rest of the layout is down and then comes up. So it actually turns out wiring. So again, what we've done is we have 2 mainline loops that were built DC years ago. Each one of those is wired to separate circuit breakers. But then we've chosen in an area, one of those to wire with the booster to a freight yard, and the other one wires the passenger yard. So we broke up into 3 locations with 3 boosters, and we've taken some main line and some of that, again, because that inrush current issue that is not when the layout's running.
I got it. Well, guys, this has been fascinating for me. You've given me a great education tonight. I hope it's helped other people. I hope I'm not the only stupid one that attends these shows, because I don't use DCC. I'm back with my normal DC circuit with 1 throttle in each hand, and I'm happy camper. So I've learned a lot tonight, and I really do appreciate all the knowledge that you all have passed on to me. So that's our show tonight, folks. Next week, we've got Rick and Marie back doing their next build on their trestle. And Bob Farquhar is going to come back and talk about electricity again. I really wasn't sure when Bob said, I want to do some basic electricity. I really didn't know where we were going to go. I thought it was electronics, to tell you the truth. But I've thoroughly enjoyed tonight's DCC discussion and how Bob presented it and all. So I'm really looking forward to what he's going to share with us next week. And our featured modeler is different, Mike Gerner. Mike is about 70 years old. He's a G-scale modeler, and his model railroad is inside his home. I think you're really going to enjoy meeting him and talking with him and seeing his model railroad. And in the meantime, I hope you do visit our website, newtracksmodelers.com, and subscribe if you haven't, and keep track of what's happening and see the new things that we're trying to accomplish. Again, if you can help us, we would appreciate your help. If you've got ideas for the program, we'd love to hear from you. And thank you so much for being here this night. We really do appreciate it. See you next Wednesday.